The science of murder, the analysis of dangerous new psychedelic drugs, and the fingerprints and trace evidence left behind by suspects at crime scenes are just some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing with a panel of forensic science investigators later this month. And you can come along for free. A special public event to celebrate 50 years of Forensic Science Ireland is going to take place at the National Convention Centre in Dublin on May 28th. The doors are at 6 p.m. and tickets are available now on eventbrite.com. Don't miss it. Lynne, welcome. So glad you agreed to come on the podcast for this because I had seen that Deadly American Marriage on Netflix, which is a documentary, I would say largely for the American market, about the murder of Jason Corbett and, or the killing now as it is, of Jason Corbett by his former wife, Molly Martens, and her father. And we had some years ago worked together on a documentary for Virgin, The Murder Files, the killing of Jason Corbett. And while researching that, you had all this vast amount of files and interviews and, you know, forensic documents and everything all around this case, which were still and are the bedrock of what happened to Jason Corbett. And there's a couple of things we want to talk about that's probably been left out of this documentary, and other things that we're surprised are in it. But firstly, to say everybody's entitled to make whatever way they want to and present a story whatever way they want to. But this has been really well watched at the moment, and there's just certain things that really are worth going over again. Firstly, you contacted Tracy Corbett, Jason's sister, just to make some contact and to talk to her about this and that we were doing this podcast, and she has sent you a message. Do you want to read that out?
Yes. So I asked her, how she felt the documentary went. So she sent me this message. So I'll basically just read it. We didn't step into this lightly. Truthfully, I didn't feel I had a choice. For almost a decade, Jason's voice was either misrepresented, manipulated, silenced completely. It was the only platform we had left to honour Jason truthfully and to push back against the narrative that had for years tried to excuse the inexcusable, his brutal killing and the devastating erasure of his legacy. Having two strong, morally driven female producers behind the project made all the difference. That gave us courage to open up, knowing it would be handled with the integrity it deserved. We were never consulted about the plea deal. We had no say, but we could speak up so the world might understand that Jason was more than a headline. He was a good father, brother, son, and friend whose life was cut short while he tried to protect his children and escape a spiraling, coercive situation. One of the most disturbing elements, and something many may have missed, is how Molly herself, in the documentary, corroborates what Jack and Sarah told us after returning to Ireland, that she had placed recording devices throughout the house, including the bedroom where Jason was killed. This confirmed what Jason had already begun to suspect. He had a bag packed. He told the kids they were going away the next day. He was looking at flights. He had asked for a divorce. He was trying to leave. He just ran out of time.
Gosh. Yeah.
So heartbreaking.
And I suppose to say, for anybody who hasn't watched or been following the case, Jason Corbett this was his second marriage. He had moved to North Carolina with Molly Martens, who had been his au pair, and he was savagely beaten to death at their home. Initially, both Molly and her father, Tom, were convicted, was it of murder, Lynne, in the American courts?
Yeah, second-degree murder in the original conviction. Yeah.
Okay. They appealed that. It ended up in the Supreme Court, and they basically they walked free then. Is that what happened?
There was a plea deal, and they pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, and they spent another few months basically in prison.
And that plea deal happened after the Supreme Court basically let them walk free. And at that point, there should have necessarily, or was certainly the hopes of his family, was that there would have been another trial, although I'm sure they didn't want to put themselves through it. But instead of that next trial, they did that plea deal, didn't they?
Yes, and they were prepared to give evidence. The children were prepared to give evidence. They had wanted to give evidence, but the prosecutors say in the documentary that they decided to take a plea deal because of new evidence that had emerged, or what was seen as new evidence which had emerged, and they didn't want to put it in front of the jury and risk it, so they took the plea deal. But the family were willing to testify, and the children really wanted to be heard.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I suppose at the heart of all of this story is, and in Deadly American Marriage, what is really interesting about it is that Molly Martens and her father, Tom, are interviewed. They have a conviction around the killing of Jason Corbett. And I suppose, as we'll talk about later on, what's extraordinary is their utter lack of remorse, whether they've a conviction for second degree murder, for manslaughter, whatever it is. He was killed at their hands, that much we know, and they have showed, anyway, on that documentary, very little remorse. Now, what Tracy's basically saying there, really, I suppose, as a victim, and this is the problem that lots of people face, this documentary was being made. It's on that big hitter, Netflix. It's going to tell the story of her brother, Jason. What do you do in that situation? You know what I mean? I can totally understand they came to the table, because if they didn't, they'd no control over how he was portrayed.
Yes, and when we spoke to her years ago, I mean, what was, and that was before the appeal was made, that he felt that not only had he been killed so savagely, with a baseball bat and a brick, and, it was horrendous. The murder scene was horrendous. But also his character had been completely assassinated, by them. And there was other television programs aired in America where they were accusing him of domestic abuse. So I think it was always a huge aim of theirs to try and clear his name, because not only his life taken, but his character was completely assassinated. And, he comes across, I think in the documentary, he does come across as a lovely man, a very kind father, and he had a great first marriage. You can kind of see from the photographs there was so much love there between himself and the first wife,
Mags. But yeah, the Martens still continue to try and assassinate his character, even at this stage, after they have, a conviction for killing him. And you can clearly see they believe what they're saying. But anyway, let's get to that. So when we were working on this and you started to investigate the killing of Jason Corbett, which happened in 2015, we were in 2019 trying to gather information, and you got in contact with the authorities in the US to find that, unlike here, you're given a huge swell of documents and information once you get the right person, once you ask the right person. And you literally got in touch with the correct person, and all of a sudden you started getting a huge amount of documents from the States.
Yes, she'd sent me over all the police interviews, the crime scene evidence, loads of paperwork. But yet all the interviews with Tom Martens, Molly Martens, the children, which were desperately sad.
And I suppose the thing that we were just like absolutely enthralled by initially was those police interviews, which were sent to you in video format. Now, the sound wasn't great, but I think when we got down what they were saying, you could literally, you were with them in that interview room in the hours after Jason Corbett had died. And while some of this is used in the Netflix show Deadly American Marriage, you've watched the whole lot, and you would have picked maybe certain bits out of it that you thought were very relevant and maybe should have been put in front of the public.
But so it's literally, it's about 3 or 4 hours after. It's 6:30 in the morning, where they're interviewed in two interrogation rooms side by side, more or less around the same time. The interviews are carried out. And Tom Martens looks very, very calm and composed, very relaxed in the situation. And within about 2 minutes into the interview, he suggests that Jason's first wife, Mags, was killed in mysterious circumstances. So he's immediately putting doubt into the minds of the interviewers, and he's trying to control the narrative. He said, "I'll just tell you how it goes," to the police officer.
And is he kind of like, so he's an ex-FBI officer, so he's feeling these people are his people as such?
Yeah, or even that he was, he would have been schooled in interrogation methods. He was very at home, seemingly. Didn't look rattled, when he's talking to them, and he's very much kind of trying to imply himself as one of them. And I'll just set the scene for you. And it seemed that there was no question that he was guilty in the situation, that he was defending his daughter's honor. He was, there was a lot of stereotypes in it. He was saying that, going on about Jason's alleged drinking, which was disproved, afterwards. And he kind of paints a picture of a heavy, or she painted a picture of a heavy drinking husband. Then in the room next door, she's saying, he loved all kinds of beer. And it wasn't uncommon for him to drink, And I spoke to police officers over there afterwards. They were reckoned that they were trying to, portray a drunken Irish stereotype, basically.
Right.
When in fact, the toxicology would show that he hardly had anything to drink. He wouldn't have been clear to drive that night.
And didn't they, in Deadly American Marriage on Netflix, they seem to suggest that maybe some of her medication is in his bloodstream?
Yes, they do. That was found in the toxicology reports. Now, the officers there are saying it's unclear whether...
Yeah, it's unclear how it went into his system as such. But basically, in an overview over those few hours, I think what you took from it at the time, and maybe it isn't really seen, is that they're telling a similar narrative in the aftermath, in neighbouring cells, in the aftermath of the most horrific event. Like, set aside for a moment whether, even if their story of him sort of attacking Molly Martens was true, and this was self-defense, taking that for a moment, they're not upset.
No, and I remember playing this tape in my office, and I must have gone out for a while, and I came back in and it looked as if the tape had stopped, but then he had gone out and he had gotten
Tom
clothes.
Martens.
Tom Martens. So it was after he was photographed. When he arrived in to the cell originally, he was in the clothes that he had been in that night, and they were taking pictures of him to come in for the crime scene pictures. And then he went out and he changed his clothes, and then you see him come back in a while later, and it's very low, but you can hear him talking about he's kind of shooting the breeze with this officer then, because the interview is wrapped up, but he's talking about the FBI and his career and providing for your retirement, and talking about cops getting so much disrespect these days, and it even talks about domestic violence and how sometimes men are victims in it, but just very relaxed, casual conversation. And I remember looking at it thinking, how can somebody whose son-in-law has just been killed, and in the most violent, horrific manner, just be so casually having conversation about, these different topics, to these, just so calm and kind of cold,
Yeah.
but trying to be personable.
And I remember as well when we were looking at the tapes initially with Molly Martens, so she's sort of rocking herself to and fro, and she's at one point is kind of saying to the interviewer, will she tell? She's not concerned actually about Jason's family back in Ireland, or them being told that he has been killed or that he's dead. She's claiming that she's afraid of them. She sort of suggests that they have, that they're... Well, she's kind of suggesting that they're involved in the IRA or something ridiculous like that.
She does, yeah. She makes some kind of suggestion about that. And, what's awful is you're just looking at the tape going, my goodness, his family have no idea even that he's died.
Yes.
And she's saying, she was asked for notification, names and numbers for the family members. And she's going, I don't know, do I have to get them today? Can I have some hours to think about it? And you're just thinking, they're his family, they've been told already, not to mind, you deciding to stall, because it was all very self-interested. The only time she seemed to dissolve it, not the only time, she was crying a few times in that interview, but, the main reason for the tears was when she was talked about having to be separated from the children, or that she might lose custody of children. There, And do
you remember the bit where she's rubbing at her neck to such an extent that the investigator, who I think is interviewed for the Netflix show, actually says to her, "Could you stop pulling at your neck, please?" And it's like as if she's rubbing and rubbing and rubbing, and then of course she has said, or she's saying, as part of her narrative, that Jason has grabbed her by the neck. The father is saying that he came in and saw his daughter grabbed by the neck and in self-defense of her basically killed his son-in-law. But it's very clear from those hours of that tape that you went through that she's doing something strange there, to the extent that the investigator tells her to stop.
Yeah, she does actually tell her to stop rubbing her neck. And, you know, what's really striking as well is they don't seem to have a scratch on them. Well, the photographs will show afterwards. And he was so horribly, badly beaten, you know, horrific injuries. And, you know, they're claiming self-defense and there isn't, you know, a scratch. And she has a very light bracelet on her wrist, which is, you know, still there. He doesn't appear to have any cuts and bruises from, you know, the pictures or the videotapes. So there's a complete difference in if this was supposed to be a fight and a self-defense, there's just no comparison, you know?
Yeah. Now, I suppose moving on from those interviews you saw, as you delved into Molly Martens' background, there was some interesting things you found out. You spoke to an ex-boyfriend of hers who had essentially been ghosted shortly before she arrived in Ireland.
Yes, Keith McGinn. She speaks about him. Well, she doesn't name him in the Netflix documentary, but she says she was in a relationship and she wanted to get away from a relationship and that she'd had a miscarriage. So he had met her, I think, on a dating site, and he was very, very bowled over by her. She's a beautiful looking woman.
Now, he's not interviewed on the documentary.
No, which I would find strange, or maybe they didn't have time, but because her behaviour before she went to Ireland he's very instructive on her behaviour. I thought it was interesting. One point in the documentary, Tom Martens is saying that when Molly is married to Jason, that he sees her character, he sees her get very down and she was a shell of herself. But when Keith McGinn is talking about her, he said he met this really vibrant person. You know, she had Christmas tree lights up on her porch. She was full of fun and everything. But as he went into the relationship, he said that she used to get, you know, very, very down. There was a lot of mood swings. She used to lock herself into the bathroom. There'd be loads of tears. He said that they had went up to a psychiatric ward, and in the aftermath of that she had become pregnant and then had the miscarriage and then essentially ghosted him. And he also talked about a lot of lies. He said she told him she was an Olympic swimmer, which he thought was a very stupid lie to be telling. Could be easily disproved. But,
Google,
you know,
then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, in the Netflix documentary, they talk a lot about the different lies that she told as well.
When she was with Jason, to the members of the family and friends group, But what I think your interview with Keith does is give us a pattern of behaviour that seems to be there before she ever gets to Ireland.
Yes, and when she left him, they were engaged. She had wanted him to propose, he said, and they were engaged. And first of all, she was going for a week, and then she was going for 3 weeks, and then he didn't hear from her. I think if she eventually got in contact, and but he seemed very kind of scarred by the relationship afterwards. He wrote a book under a pseudonym, for a different name about the relationship, but he definitely found her very troubled. That was just before she went to Ireland.
So when we look at how Molly Martens comes to Ireland, at that time Keith is being ghosted. Jason is here in Ireland. He's lost his first wife. He's 2 young children. His family and friends have been very good to them, but he doesn't want to rely on them forever, and he's trying to be a bit more independent. So he needs a nanny to mind the kids while he goes out to work. And there was interesting things you found out about how she got to Ireland, and I suppose how unusual really she was as a nanny.
Yes, she was, because usually people would come, I suppose, when they're 18 or 19, and they usually come from places like Spain or Portugal or places like that when they want to learn a language. And she was older. She was in her early 20s. Tracy Corbett Lynch wrote about it in her book, My Brother Jason. She wrote all about that time when he was really grieving for his first wife, Mags, and how, the family had tried to help him out as much as they could, but the children were very, very small, and I think he wanted to, after a while, he wanted to try and be some way independent. But I think when she came along, when she sent in this CV that looked pretty, dazzling, and had all these qualifications on the CV. I think that turned out later that they weren't, they were
Okay.
false. Um, and she was older, and she was English speaking, and loved children, so she seemed to be a perfect solution for him.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't get somebody that as old as that to take care of the kids. And when she arrived, first of all, they all, it was very unusual to have someone, I suppose, coming from America as
Yeah,
well,
for
because
sure. Yeah.
European. I had au pairs myself with the children, and they were teachers from Germany who used to come over to learn a bit of English in the summers.
Absolutely. There's an advantage for them and you, her coming from America, and with that CV she presented to him. I think there was, her sporting achievements were on it, as well as she looked like, an absolutely incredible young person who could turn their hand to anything and be good at it. And she was educated and middle class and all those things.
Yes, and I suppose you could trust you felt you could trust the kids with somebody a bit older. He was going out to work every day.
Mm.
And, she just seemed like a great solution for him, I think, because, he was very grief stricken. It was a real love story, his first wife, by all accounts, I remember hearing, I live in Limerick, and it's a small county, I suppose, but I remember hearing about his first wife dying, and there was people I had known of who had kids in the creche, where she ran a creche, and she was supposed to have been a gorgeous woman. And I also had heard, reports of him being a really kind, lovely guy, that he had come out and given somebody I knew, some of the kids' toys when he was going to America. So I had known a bit about the family.
Yeah. And when Molly arrived first at the airport, she was actually turned back.
Yes, because she didn't have the right visa. And she came back, I think, 2 weeks later. I think we spoke to Tracy about this, and they couldn't get over her determination, because it would have cost a lot of money to buy a ticket and come back, a second time.
Mm-hmm.
Then and she came through Dublin. I think she had come through Shannon the first time, and then came through Dublin the second time.
Yeah. And, she eventually goes, she settles down. Their impressions of her, I think the family, they were more impressed for him that she was a bonus to him and his life, and he was getting out to work and he had someone to mind the kids. Like, they weren't really kind of paying much heed to this au pair until they kind of eventually realised there was a bit of a romance going on. Do you know how quick that was?
I don't, within the first year, I think, of her being there,
yeah.
They liked her. In Tracy's book, they thought she was, almost something like Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music, was with their original impressions of her. And I think then, as the year went on, they noticed then that the relationship was developing between the two of them. There was kind of smiles between them, and they seemed to be developing. And I think people were happy for him that, been through such a traumatic time, and she seemed really good with the kids. That's the impression that they all had.
Mm-hmm. Now, that romance blossomed into what really seemed like a fairy tale, that, after the grief of the death of his first wife, he meets this beautiful blonde, all-American girl, and they move for a new life with the children to America. And she is so into these children and wants to be their mother. And again, that lies at the heart of everything that happened. And I do think the Netflix documentary handles that really well and gives us a good understanding of how much she believed that she was their mother, and that, she developed this connection with them that almost seemed to oust him from the equation once they got to America.
Yeah, the children talk about that, especially I think her relationship with Sarah. She seemed to push Jason Corbett away from, she really monopolized her. Even when family were coming over to visit, she'd always find an excuse to take Sarah away from them, and more so than Jack. I think Jack said in the children's testimony in the documentary is really heartbreaking. I mean, they've been through so much over the past 8 years, and they're amazing kids. But they basically, they did say, Sarah said she very much monopolized her time. She doted on her, and Jack said he says in the documentary, he said if he thinks if they got to the age of 13 and they were asked who they would have gone with, he would have gone with his father, and Sarah probably would have gone with Molly.
Yeah.
She was so young when she was the only mother that she would have known at that stage.
Absolutely. Now, you said to me that you feel that one thing about the documentary is that almost the motive for the killing sort of comes to light, and what emerges is some of the things, and as Tracy says in her note there, some of the things that the children alleged when they actually ultimately got home were happening. So there was some sort of a situation going on in that house that Molly Martens still stands by it to this day and claiming that he was abusive of her. She to this day pretty much suggests that she'd make the better, that the children, I think she actually says directly, the children are being brainwashed against her. And she still believes that. So in that house, we do get a sense of what's going on between them. And the children were so small when this happened, and their initial interview happened in the US in a particular sort of, what would you call that?
Yes, it was a social care setting.
Yes.
I think what seems to be at the heart of what happened was that she wanted to adopt the children.
Yeah.
And it emerged that she had consulted a divorce lawyer just a few months into the marriage. Then there were, it's shown in the Netflix documentary there as well that originally that there was some kind of a plan that the adoption procedure would be done in tandem kind of with the marriage. But then there's a document shown that he asks a solicitor what would happen if they split up, and it's written down in black and white that she could possibly get custody if she's given the adoption rights. And, his children were so precious to him. I think that's what stopped him. And then, the Martens will say on the documentary that, they wanted, they were pushing for this adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, and the Tom Martens.
So they wanted the kids, but not him.
Yeah, he's very indignant about it still in the documentary, which is incredible to see. He's,
he's indignant about how good a mother his daughter was to those kids, and, how they're almost dismissive about those children now who are now pretty much adults. And that, that their memories have been, that they don't know what they're talking about, that Molly really was a fabulous mother to them.
Yeah, and they seem to just skirt over the fact that,
she killed their dad.
That they killed, their father.
Yeah.
I mean, Molly says at one stage that Jason would want her to have the children.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible.
Incredible thing to say.
The Netflix documentary, it's just incredible, after what she did to him.
Because in a way, by giving them the forum, you kind of see, it is flabbergasting for us maybe to see it, but we know the story so well on this side of the Atlantic, and, we know an awful lot more about it than maybe the viewers in the US are getting. But what I do say, well, it's they have presented the facts in those interviews on the Netflix documentary, so the viewer can make up their own mind about what they feel about the motive for the killing, about all that information around possible divorce proceedings and adoption, etc., and what they now say and show little remorse. But what I found quite stunning was that they again allowed the Martens air this disgusting story that they suggest that Jason Corbett killed his first wife, Mags, who died from an asthma attack.
Oh, it's horrific. And, again, this comes up in the original police interviews. 2 minutes into the interview, it was incredible, really. Tom Martens just makes that suggestion and puts it there. And it just beggars belief. He claims that Mags's father, Mikey Fitzpatrick, who again he refers to in a really derogatory fashion in another interview taken after the killing, calls him an uneducated man. Again, this kind of these Irish tropes are thrown out, throughout it, and claims that he went to a party. He flew over to America for the wedding or beforehand, and suggested that that Jason had killed his daughter. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you fly over to a wedding to a man that you believe that had killed your daughter? And then if you're an FBI agent and you hear this, that you take absolutely no action about it and it never comes up again.
And while the documentary gives Mikey Fitzpatrick's daughter a kind of a right to reply about that, she was there, was she, that night?
She was in the house with them that night, and Mags Fitzpatrick, Jason knocked on her door, she says, and said that, her sister was very unwell. She was having an asthma attack. She was down with her asthma inhaler in the kitchen. She said he was trying to do everything to save her, and they went off in an ambulance. I mean, and she was never called to testify in any way to disprove these claims that seem to be made on experts reading the autopsy report from Ireland.
Where did all that go within the court case? Because that was certainly, as you say, it's a few minutes into his interview with the police after the killing of Jason Corbett, and Mags's father actually wrote a statement and got a statement signed to say that never happened before he died himself. But was that raised in that first trial? Was that used as part of the, I suppose, the defence of the Martens? They're still talking about it today. So it's been really part of the heart of what they have to say, despite the fact it's been totally disproved. There's no witnesses to suggest anything like that. And in America, they have got some experts to raise queries around the woman's death. But she actually died here in this country and was attended by doctors here in this country, which have to be the primary source of information in any country or jurisdiction.
Absolutely. And her sister was there with her that night and was a witness to all the events, but she was never brought over to be interviewed or to give evidence. And the DA, the assistant DA in the Netflix documentary, said that was part of the reason that they accepted this plea deal. But I remember speaking to Marion Fitzpatrick years ago when these accusations of domestic violence first emerged, even before the first trial, and I spoke to her and she called him a gentle giant. They considered him a son. They absolutely adored him. He had a great relationship with his first wife's family.
What's your big takeout from the documentary?
I think they reveal themselves, the Martens, in it. I think that it comes true that she wanted to adopt the children. She wanted custody of the children. As Tracy said, he had enough. He seemed to be coming back to Ireland. He was coming away from her. Jack says he had told his father about a recording device in the car, and that he seemed to be just very fed up. And even the recordings of Jason supposedly being angry, which were obviously staged by Molly Martens, he's saying to her in them, he's saying, you're separating me from my family. And the adoption. So, they're very, very revealing that you don't know what's happened beforehand, but he's saying, all I'm trying to do is have dinner with my family. And she's making out, that he's being an abusive husband, but it's coming true what she's doing. She's gaslighting him.
And she's provided those recordings herself because she would have made them, or, she certainly, I imagine they're coming from her side of the fence, those recordings, because the Corbett's haven't heard them before. But she's the only one aware that there's a recording being made. And she clearly feels that they make her come across as a victim. Whereas we see it different. You know what I mean? We can see that they're actually proving something otherwise. But she definitely sees them as, this was what I was living with.
Absolutely, but there's no tape there that shows domestic violence as far as I can hear. I can hear that he is getting very frustrated with her. And it comes true in Tracy's book as well. She repeatedly says that he was gaslighted. It was coercive control. She was constantly trying to keep him away from the children, take Sarah away from him, separate him from the children. Her plan seemed to be to leave him. And in that, they talk about the fact that he wouldn't give her custody. So they're actually explaining the reason why she wanted to leave him. She wanted the children.
Yes. And I suppose really, and to wrap it up, in all, Jason as a victim is on the back foot going into this because he's a man And like really in the ordered scheme of things, it's really men who are coercively controlling the women, we believe, and they're the powerful ones in these marriages. And secondly, he's Irish in America, where he's sort of as a victim now passed away, etc. But still, his legacy, I suppose, is up against this, FBI intelligence officer and his all-American daughter.
Yeah, I looked up actually Irish stereotypes just on Google there to see what they were. They were fighting Irish, drinking Irish, hot-tempered Irish. And it was all those tropes that they were, that come across throughout both of their interviews. Molly says in her interview how much Irish people drink. The interviewing detective is kind of taken aback, and he mentions a lot about drinking. And they come through in both the police interviews. So that's what they were trying to get across. But through the toxicology evidence was completely different. And it's an awful travesty of justice. The other thing is the children come across as, they've been through just horrendous 8 years of going through the trial, the father's killing being all over the newspaper, then the conviction, and then the appeal, and it's just been one thing after another. And you can see they look so like their parents, and they've just really honoured him and made him really proud, and they've stuck up for the truth about him. And they've all kept, the whole family, Tracy and David as well. And I was very impressed with the way they have nurtured the children and helped them to heal throughout this. And David Lynch, Tracy's husband, said they trained as foster parents. They've got them so much help, and I suppose they're as best as they can be in a horrific situation.
Yes, and you can see the warmth within that family, that new family, that they have, the Tracy's own sons and the two of them. They're a family, like you can see them in the car together.
Yeah, and the music, and the fact that they remember him. And I suppose as time goes on, you hope that the good memories all come true and all that dark starts to fade in the past. And you would hope that, I understand why they would do this Netflix documentary, because they want to honor their person and they want the truth out there.
Yeah.
They have to fight for him and protect his name, because he lost so much, know.
Yeah.
And I suppose with this plea deal, they just felt that they didn't get justice, but they've certainly got it out there now, I suppose, all over the world. Their feelings, and they were the two people in the house. They're and they can speak the truth about their father. And I think Sarah, I haven't read it yet, but she seems to have, I've been talking to a few journalist friends of ours, actually said she wrote a really powerful memoir as well, A Time for Truth, which I think give context into all it's a whole piece of a puzzle, really, when you look back, there was all these little things that they see as red flags, but it's only now, years later, when they pieced it all together and they realised what was going on.
Mm-hmm. And there was another bit of the message there from Tracy, was there, you wanted to finish on?
Yeah, which I thought was very inspiring. She said, "We will carry this with us for the rest of our lives, but if speaking out helps even one person recognise the danger signs of coercive control and find a way out, then maybe something good can come from the heartbreak we've endured. We will always carry Jason with us, but we're not stuck in that tragedy. We're building a future with love and a fierce commitment to protecting each other."
Yeah.
So that's, that sums up.
It does. And for sure. And we leave her with that last word. So Lynne Kelleher, thank you very much. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.